released in 2022 after about 2 years of drafting. The primary goals are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030 and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 and maintain net negative greenhouse gas emissions thereafter. And throughout all of this work, it's important to us that we address environmental injustices that are related to climate. You can use that QR code there through your smartphones if you'd like to access the plan. It's also accessible on our website, and I can throw links in the chat later to make it easier to find. So not only do we know the plan is necessary to help avert the worst impacts of the climate crisis, it also brings a number of opportunities to the state that we really try to emphasize and highlight. The first, I kind of mentioned this on the last slide, it is a way to address environmental injustices, both historic and then think about how to involve environmental justice communities in our transition to a cleaner economy. It's also a way to foster healthier communities with cleaner air. And overall, we know that will create jobs and reduce costs. So the clean energy economy in Michigan is really growing and it provides a lot of job opportunities. And in terms of costs, we know that a lot of these actions can help reduce utility bills. So it'll mean savings for Michiganders and Michigan households. All right, so I mentioned it was about a 2-year process to create the plan. This graphic shows some of the engagement that went into it. So the Council on Climate Solutions met at least 17 times to formulate the plan. There were 2 formal consultations with tribal governments. There were 6 topical work groups. You can see pictured here across different economic sectors to develop specific recommendations for those economic sectors in the plan. There were almost 2,000 public comments that were received on the draft plan. This was during COVID, so we relied on virtual input, but we had listening sessions as well, at least 7 from 2021 to 2022, listed at the bottom there. And as we continue to kind of further our analysis, we continue to find ways to have more engagements. We actually have an EPA grant right now that's helping us do in-person engagements that we got to do back in 2023 through early 2024. So we continue to do a lot of engagement around the plan and its implementation. So overall, there's a lot of information on this slide, and it's all very important. There are 6 pillars of the climate plan that kind of lay out the various steps we need to take. And you can kind of think of them by economic sectors. So that's the column on the left there. It's a commitment to environmental justice and pursuing a just transition, cleaning the electric grid, electrifying vehicles and increasing public transit, repairing and decarbonizing homes and businesses, driving clean innovation in industry, and this pillar includes the waste sector, and then finally protecting Michigan's land and water, so thinking more about natural and working lands across the state. In the right column, you see our 2030 goals. These are kind of interim goals that help us reach the 2050 target of carbon neutrality, and they're laid out by each sector as well. So in terms of our commitment to environmental justice, the current goal is to deliver at least 40% of benefits to low-income communities, and the 2030 goal is that energy burden of household income will be less than 6%. For the electric grid, the electric sector, the 2030 goal is 60% renewable energy and an energy storage goal of 2,400 megawatts. And a few of these have been kind of codified into law with our 2023 clean energy legislation, which helps set a 2030 goal of 50% clean energy by 2030. In terms of the transportation sector, the 2030 goal is to have enough infrastructure to support 2 million electric vehicles by 2030, which includes 1,000 EV chargers. And then in terms of the building sector, the 2030 goal is 2 million retrofitted buildings and reducing emissions in buildings by 17%. The industrial sector, which I mentioned includes waste, has a 2030 goal of achieving 45% recycling rate statewide, as well as cutting food loss and waste in half. And then for protecting Michigan's land and water, the 2030 goal is 30% protected land and water. This is part of the DNR's Michigan the Beautiful initiative, which is committed to the same goal. All right, so on our website, you can find both the climate plan pictured on the far left there, as well as annual reports. So our office started putting out these annual reports from the plan in 2022. We've had one each year since. So that's a good way to kind of check in on what we achieved in the past year. All right, and I wanted to get into the greenhouse gas inventory. This was something we were able to update this past year. Again, we have this EPA grant that is supporting planning, analysis, and engagement, and we were able to expand the greenhouse gas inventory for the first time since 2005, I think. So really appreciate that support. So this is our emissions by economic sector for the state using 2021 data. We primarily rely on an EPA tool called the State Inventory. I'm forgetting the last word. I think State Inventory Tool. And so it uses primarily default data that helps provide estimates for these emissions. And so the largest emitting sector is the electric power sector. Almost 30% of our emissions come from that sector. It's followed by transportation, which is about 26% of our emissions. Next is industry, which is about 17.5%. And you'll see after that, it's residential and commercial buildings, and then emissions related to agriculture and wastewater. And so total, this is about 181 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent that we have statewide. Oh, and I can't remember, this is 2021 data, which is the most recent we have from that EPA data set. There's a couple years lag time, so soon we'll be able to update to 2022 data. This is a deeper dive into those specific sectors. So the electric power sector, this is where most of our emissions come from. However, we've already seen pretty drastic improvement in this sector, primarily through coal plant closures. So you'll see 2005 is our baseline year there. And we've reduced emissions by about 31% since 2005. You do see an uptick in natural gas related emissions as we've closed coal power plants, which just emphasizes the continued need for renewable energy build out. And as you can see in that text box on the right, by 2032, we are expecting the grid to be coal-free according to integrated resource plans that our utilities have put out. All right, then transportation is that next largest sector. We've seen a slight decrease in emissions here. You can see the baseline year dotted in the middle, 2005, and we actually have some data going back to 1990, so you can see the trends over the last few decades. The majority of our transportation emissions are related to gasoline passenger cars, but these have decreased a little bit over time, I think largely due to cars becoming more fuel efficient. But we have seen a slight increase in our diesel vehicles, which you see in the kind of orange bar line there. All right, the building sector, I think this is the fourth largest. I do want to note we don't include electricity that's consumed by buildings in this analysis. This is just on-site fuel combustion. So think about the natural gas, propane, heating oil that a home or business needs for home heating, space heating, cooking, and water heating. This has also slowly decreased since 2005, our emissions in this sector, but you do see it's predominantly natural gas, and then in areas that have propane and heating oil, you see that it's represented by that oil line for both residential and commercial buildings. All right, there's also a lot on this slide. So the industrial sector, again, we see decrease in emissions since 2005. You do see a notable decrease in 2009, which is likely due to a drop in production during the Great Recession, and it did rebound in 2010 and 2011. But I'll try to walk you through just kind of what you're looking at here. The top orange line is any emissions related to natural gas and oil production in the state. Everything from distribution and transmission of those fuels. And then below that are some other industrial process emissions, so those related to cement manufacturing, iron and steel production, and then refrigerants and a few other processes. Then the green lines below are industrial fuel combustion, so any of the emissions related to the energy needed at these industrial facilities. All right, the waste sector, we've seen pretty substantial decline in emissions in the sector as well. So mostly from landfills and the emissions related to landfills. You do see a little bit of emissions from composting. Overall, we know composting is a climate solution, but it isn't totally emissionless, so that's why it shows up there for some of those larger composting sites. And then municipal wastewater and industrial wastewater have been very static over time, but have some emissions related to those processes. All right, the agricultural emissions, this is the only sector where we're actually seeing an increase over time. And you can see it's largely due to an increase in the amount of dairy cows in the state, most likely. So some of these I have to, the key call outs explain some of the emissions, and I always have to reference them myself. So the animal emissions, these are accounting for methane and nitrous oxide related to both manure management and then enteric fermentation, which is like animal belching and flatulence. And then direct soil emissions, these are emissions related from the soil, so animal manure and urine deposits that are in soil, crop residues, which is organic material left in fields after harvests, and then fertilizer deposited in soil. And then finally, natural lands. And this is where it's there's both some emitting categories, but then also this is largely considered our sink. And this really helps us, some of these sectors are harder to decarbonize. So even in 2050, we know there'll be some emissions related to their processes, but this is where a sink kind of helps save us. So this is from our forests and our trees. So if you see the comparison of our baseline year 2005 on the left there to the most recent inventory year of 2021, the emitting category slightly increased. You see on the top kind of those burnt orange and brown fields, it's forest emissions. These might be fires, land use change, agricultural soil carbon flux is there. And this is related to carbon cycling in cropland and grasslands. And then wetlands can be both, they store carbon, but they can also release carbon dioxide and methane. And so for our state, apparently it's a kind of net emitting category. And then finally, settlement emissions. This is largely human developments and associated land use changes. But then the green part below the line, that's what creates the sink. And so that's where you see forest sequestration, harvested wood products. So that's kind of the carbon that's stored in lumber and other wood products. And then settlement sequestrations is considered like urban trees, or kind of the smaller level trees you see in urban areas. All right. Oh, and I should quick point out that while I mentioned at the very top of the emissions analysis that we have 181 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent statewide, with the sink, this reduces it to something more like 100, I think, 68 million metric tons because of the 12.4 million metric ton emissions that this sector helps us store. All right, so kind of understanding where our emissions come from, you better understand kind of what our priority areas are in implementing the My Healthy Climate Plan. Again, I mentioned the governor's office calls for all of this. It's the governor's climate plan, but Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy has been the one kind of tasked with leading this, and our office is the one primarily in charge of it. However, it is a statewide approach, and I think that we're really committed to that, both through primarily the Council on Climate Solutions. There's a designee from each of these state departments listed on the very bottom there, and we regularly interact with staff in these departments in coordinating the implementation of the climate plan. Just to demonstrate some of that, this is that kind of similar graphic to before. On the left side, you see our 6 climate pillars or action pillars for the climate plan. And on the right, don't expect you to read every single one of these, but it highlights some programs and initiatives that help us implement some of those sector-specific goals. So just for example, with our commitment to environmental justice and pursuing a just transition, within EGLE, we have the My EJ screening tool, which is available online and was created through our Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate, as well as our Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, all of which are key to implementing these goals. But then Leo actually runs the Community and Worker Economic Transition Office, which is also really key in pursuing these goals. And you can really see that across the other sectors through work done at MDOT, our Department of Transportation, the Public Service Commission, Department of Ag, the DNR, etc. All right, and then at EGLE, our office actually runs a program called the EGLE Climate Liaisons, which is just a way of embedding climate across the work that we do at EGLE. It's like a 1,600-person department, so it's pretty large, and we're really working to ensure that climate's a consideration across the work that we do. So here you just see the liaisons pictured at our most recent conference, but an example of some of the work going on that's related to the climate plan. We have a maritime decarbonization task force with our air quality division and Office of Great Lakes. There's really also methane emissions reduction work happening in our air quality division, material management division, and our, oh, they renamed themselves, geologic resource management division, I think. Quite a few programs working on renewable energy and citing renewable energy, and then a number of kind of public education initiatives, as well as many more. So our office specifically is kind of like strategic plan and vision is that we develop climate policy priorities, and then through narrative, organizing, and key strategic initiatives, we coordinate and mobilize state and non-state resources to reach the governor's climate goals. You kind of see those key areas listed below, and then this actually breaks up some of our specific projects by those key areas. So I'll start on the far right there. You see strategic initiatives. We really focused on bringing home federal funding through the IRA and the BIL to ensure that we had the funds to support our climate work here in Michigan. And then we specifically know that you saw the biggest emitting category is our electric power sector. So really focused on accelerating the deployment of renewable energy, not only to help address some of the largest area of our emissions, but because that also helps to decarbonize the rest of the sectors. So it only enhances if you have a cleaner grid and you connect your EV to that grid, like that's only better for those related emissions. And same for electrifying buildings. If it's all connected to a cleaner grid, it all has a greater impact. So we're really focused on that. And then finally, related to equity and environmental justice that I mentioned earlier, building justice 40 capacity across the state. And then you'll see that throughout the other kind of, we track in reports. So we have those annual reports. We put out the greenhouse gas inventory. In terms of the communication, inspiring, and mobilization, we have a big conference every year. We have a lot of public facing documents like our My Healthy Climate Bulletin, which is an email that goes out monthly. And then like the policy planning and prioritization, we're continuing to further our analysis related to the plan, which is a kind of part of that work. And our organizing and coordinating networks, I think, was demonstrated through the other slides. We coordinate across the state government with an EGLE to ensure the implementation of the plan. And I'll spend a little time going into some of our ongoing initiatives. So this is just a list, and I'm going to go into detail. I figured this would be useful if you look at the slides later. One of our big programs is in coordination with two other parts of EGLE. This is the Renewables Ready Communities program. That we won an EPA award of $129.1 million through the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. This was awarded last year. We were like one of 25 or 29 awardees nationwide for a really competitive grant program, so we're really proud of this. This will further fund an existing state pilot called Renewables Ready Communities Award. And this is an award to local units of government that have permitted and hosted utility scale renewable energy projects. And so it's existing with a state funding allocation of, I think, $30 million. So this will really add to that offering and make it a more permanent program. And this will also, the EPA funding will help us expand and create a brownfield renewable energy pilot. And this work we're waiting for, it has to be approved by the state legislature. So we're waiting for the approval, and then we're ready to spend the grant funds. The My Solar for All, this was another EPA grant award from last year. This is part of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is to help support residential and residential serving community solar across the state, primarily for low-income households and low-income communities. This is headed up by Dr. Joy Wong in our office, and it's just getting going, but there is an open funding opportunity actually through this program, which is a part of our larger My Healthy Climate Challenge. I don't know if any of you were able to go to our My Healthy Climate conference that we held in Detroit in April of this year. It was our third annual conference, and our fourth annual conference will once again be in April in Detroit next year. But at our conference, we launched the My Healthy Climate Challenge, which will be a series of grant competitions that we're holding throughout this year and next. And the first grant competition is the Solar for Savings. So this is a competitive grant pilot program where they're looking for projects that are related to residential rooftop solar, residential serving community solar, and then in some cases enabling upgrades that allow for the rooftop solar. And you can see at the bottom right there, I can also share this information because we're trying to promote it. The first deadline is actually tomorrow, but then we'll be having kind of 3 rounds of this. So other entities interested in applying can apply by June 30th and July 30th. All right, another initiative we head up is focused on bringing more federal funding to the state. And so this is the Michigan Climate Investment Accelerator. There's kind of 2 components here. The Michigan Climate Investment Fund is matching grants from the state to entities that receive grants from the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator Program, which is an EPA program, as well as some technical assistance to help community lenders apply for those funds. And then there's actually a Michigan Climate Investment Hub that's located at New Lab at Michigan Central that's helping to foster more green lending in public-private partnerships. And then the Michigan Justice 40 Accelerator is another program our office runs. It's a 12-month cohort-based program to help build capacity for community-based organizations in low-income and disadvantaged communities. So there's one-on-one technical assistance, some workshops to help learn how to better apply for government grants and philanthropic grants. It's a lot about kind of that cohort, so peer-to-peer learning sessions. And it was, we don't say the entities that receive funding, but they have a number of projects they work on, from workforce development, resilience hubs, energy and energy efficiency, sustainable housing, among others. And then another program we're really proud of is the My Healthy Climate Corps. So these, was affiliated with the AmeriCorps program, and these are members who serve at organizations across the state who help bring kind of a capacity to organizations to work on climate projects to help us further implement the plan. They work with nonprofits, local governments, state government, and I think some universities. This program was launched in 2024, and we finished the first cohort last year. And then we're in the midst of the second cohort. I will note this program was affected by recent AmeriCorps grant terminations, but we're looking for a way to continue some of the projects. All right, and then this is not actually work that our office does, but a lot of people just see us as EGLE writ large. And so another part of EGLE does a fair amount of renewable energy and energy efficiency programming, as well as kind of recycling related efforts. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of the open opportunities through that program. This is the State Energy Office, which is in the Material Management Division, but they're running the My Home Energy Rebate Program, which is a DOE program. There was a pilot in the UP and Holland throughout fall of 2024 through early winter, and it actually launched statewide, I think only a month or so ago. And so if you're interested in this, I think it's primarily for low-income households, but they're offering both home efficiency rebates and then home electrification and appliance rebates. And I can also try to collect some of these so it's easier to access our links after the fact. And then another one I wanted to highlight, there's Charge Up Michigan, again, operated by the same kind of energy office in EGLE. This is for EV charging across the state to help increase our access to charging stations. And that's another one that's currently open from the energy office. All right, that is the end of my slides. I did tell Sandra it was probably 20 to 30 minutes, so I did stick to what we typically do. I'm happy to answer questions. I know I saw a few that were submitted ahead of time, and I can kind of try to address those up front. I think there were some questions around what to prioritize, and I think I would just emphasize what we've identified as kind of key strategies, which is focusing on renewable energy deployment, so supporting any efforts related to that, as well as continuing to think about how we ensure all Michigan communities are involved in the just transition. And then some question about kind of like how to be involved. And I think from our perspective, we really encourage people to sign up for, I mentioned we have that monthly My Healthy Climate Bulletin, so you can sign up at a link shown here. And then we have a number of engagements that we do. And so looking for a virtual listening session to attend, or sometimes we'll have in-person engagements. We have our annual conference. Those are all great ways to be involved. But then also just really encourage looking at what you have locally. Like most cities, towns, and counties across the state have something going on. So just looking at how you can support local efforts, because these all are related to working towards the implementation of the plan. I'm happy to answer any other questions. I admit I can't see.
Okay, so thank you so much, Julia.
Yeah,
Maybe we should stop screen sharing and then we'll be able to see everybody.
I'll do that.
Right. And so Vicki Paulson from the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw has agreed to start pitch questions to Julia from the chat and also from the questions we received when you registered. So Vicki, you want to unmute and take it away?
Yes, so thank you, Julia. That was very informative. Many of the questions submitted in advance are dealing with financing. You mentioned you have quite a number of funds from and grants from the EPA. And what about the current federal pullback on the environmental efforts? Are you concerned at all? Are you still confident in receiving that money from the EPA? Or how is the federal government's current plan going to affect the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan?
Yeah, it's a great question, and definitely one that's on our mind a lot. Currently, all of our funding appears safe. We're able to draw down funds. We were affected by funding freezes that initially affected a lot of grantees back in February and March, but currently all of our funding is accessible, but it's just a really uncertain time. So I don't think anyone knows for sure. And then in the case of I mentioned our My Healthy Climate Corps was impacted by AmeriCorps grants. Unfortunately, there is that's being contested. Our Attorney General joined a 24 state suit to try to contest that, but it's ongoing. So that's the one where we have been affected already. But generally speaking, we're just really sticking to existing work plans and grant agreements that we have and ensuring that we're in compliance with all of our terms and conditions. And that helps keep our money safe for now.
Okay, so still focused on funding, there was a question about when Consumers Energy gives rebates, is that money coming from Consumer Energy or is that funded by the state of Michigan?
I think I will confess I don't know the full answer. This is most utility rebate programs are coordinated with our Michigan Public Service Commission. So I don't know for certain, but I think usually it's the utility that's related to that.
Okay. And you mentioned the goal of 100,000 EV chargers by 2030. So I imagine you have some plan in place for that. How is the public supposed to learn when new ones are installed?
Great question. So that the office that's primarily in charge of that is the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. It's a joint office between Michigan and Economic Development Corporation and Michigan Department of Transportation. However, I do know EGLE has a EV charger map where you could see, can't promise it's the most up to date, but at least probably at least annually, hopefully more than that, they'll show where chargers are installed. And I will try to find that for you. It's GIS map online.
If you could put that in the chat, that'd be great. Then people could see that link and copy. That'd be great.
So Julia, are you going to have an app? I mean, when you're driving along, I mean, I look at my Electrify America app, so if I could look at the Michigan app, then I would know. So,
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we our office is not involved in that, but maybe someone is. Seems like it'd be very useful.
yeah.
Okay.
What about public transit? Seems that'd be a logical thing to do. What plans are in place for that?
Yeah, so I think the goal in the climate plan is to increase public transit by 15%. That is one, again, because it's kind of a coordinated state effort. Public transportation primarily falls under the Michigan Department of Transportation and local efforts. However, I do know we have My Healthy Climate Corps members that have served with public transit or organizations. So that's kind of a smaller way that we're able to support some of those efforts in the state.
Okay. And you mentioned our carbon sinks, our trees, vegetation. Is there any effort going to be put in place to increase that?
I know that Michigan the Beautiful, which I mentioned is that DNR, Department of Natural Resources initiative, its goal is 30% land and water protected by 2030. I am not super involved in that, but I believe that will be increasing our general sink or initiatives to support conservation that would increase the sink. So yes. You can find out more information. I believe they have a website on that and should have a plan forthcoming this year with more detail on how they want to go about achieving that.
Okay.
Here it is. I'll throw that in the chat as well.
We have concerns here about the UP. What about the rice generators up there?
Yeah, so this is one where the Michigan Public Service Commission is more involved in anything related to what constitute clean energy, which I believe is kind of at the source of this question. I think there's a desire in the UP for natural gas to be considered clean if there's carbon capture. In general, our office is really committed to ensuring we meet our renewables targets and our clean energy legislation. So we're not as involved in that, but if you're interested, I encourage you to follow. I think the Michigan Public Service Commission is involved in that.
And I can just add that I was able to get in touch with Douglas Jester, who is apparently someone who has studied energy in the UP, and I'm going to try to arrange a presentation by him about the rice generators and then in general power in the UP and how the UP can use renewable energy just like the Lower Peninsula. So that'll be coming up hopefully in September.
Julia, do you know anything about the Michigan House bills 4027 and 4028? If they get eventually passed, do you know what kind of impact they would have on the current plans to move forward?
I unfortunately don't know those House bills.
Those are the ones that are trying to do away with the Michigan Public Service Commission's ability to approve large-scale solar and wind projects if the local governments kind of delay them.
Gotcha, the state siting authority.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we aren't involved in any proposed legislation. Again, we're really committed to just ensuring we do reach our renewable energy targets. And I think the program that we like to highlight is that Renewables Ready Communities Awards, because it encourages more engagement at the local level in the permitting and hosting of renewable energy projects. So I think that's what I would say for that. If you haven't heard of the Renewables Ready Communities Awards program, there's really great press releases and a new map that shows where it happens. But through those awards, it's about $5,000 per megawatt in most cases. These smaller townships and towns across the state have extra funding to run a number of projects that support the local area. So with some of those awards, you're seeing investments in upgrades to a firehouse, a playground. It's really creating really great public good projects. So I would encourage you to look into that. I'll try to find a press release to throw in the chat on that as well.
Do you shed any light or direct us to someone who might be able to explain the effects if any of these large data centers come to Michigan and use our Lake Michigan water as a resource?
Yeah, so again, I'll probably just be directing some of these specific conversations to, if it's an area of interest, it's primarily in the Michigan Public Service Commission's domain. I do know that, again, this just underscores the need for building out renewable energy. If there's load growth, we continue to be really committed to energy efficiency efforts across the state, as well as deployment of renewable energy to help account for that load growth. So I think that's what I would say for that one.
Okay. Have you any idea how Michigan is preparing for safe hazardous waste disposal if Canada stops taking our trash?
We're not really involved in waste disposal from, that would be EGLE. So I know I'm going to be very frustrating, but I don't work on our material management. So it's not in the Office of Climate and Energy.
Okay, all right. What about, you did mention composting. Someone thought you said that it wasn't part of the climate solution, or can you address that question?
Yes, this is a great question. And sometimes I get tripped up in explaining this one. So generally diverting food waste and like yard scraps is a climate solution. And it's not totally emissionless. There are still some, I think, primarily methane emissions related to composting. However, it is still definitely a solution. It's better than having it in with all the rest of the landfill. But it is not without some minor emissions. And I recently had to try to explain this, and there's a decent EPA website that I will try to find and throw in the chat. So it makes a little more sense than my explanation.
Okay. Any comment you would have on any bipartisan community solar legislation? And how could community solar help meet our emission targets?
Again, we don't really get involved in legislation. I think that's currently being considered or drafted, but through the My Solar for All program, we are able to support residential surveying community solar. So I think it's an exciting opportunity to fund that through it's a national program, and then our state-run program is the My Solar for All. So just encourage you to look into that program.
Okay. And you did mention that there are assistance for homeowners to apply for. Any idea how many people have applied for that, and how is it advertised so people know about the program?
So I wish I had a more thorough answer, but that is through our energy office. I'm going to throw a link in the chat. I think they've been doing a lot of engagement. I've heard they've been doing some door-to-door campaigning around it. They might have mailers. I just threw a link in the chat. And I think they're working with some kind of community partners to help promote it and increase access to it. So I'd encourage you all to look into it and share it with your networks as well.
Okay, thanks. There's a question here, I'm not quite sure, but maybe you understand it better than I do. What was the basis for the administration order Consumers Coal Plant to stay open? And is there any ability to fight back on that?
Yeah, so this was very recent news. So kudos to whoever had that question and is paying attention. Yeah, so that's from the Federal Department of Energy issued an emergency order related to the upcoming closure of a coal plant in Holland or the Ottawa County area. And again, sorry, this is mostly the Michigan Public Service Commission, but generally we know that it's important to reach our climate targets that we do eliminate coal from the grid. And so just emphasizes the need for that on the timeline that had been part of the utilities plans.
Let's see if we have missed anything. Here's a very important question, I think. How do you plan to win over the disinformed to oppose the My Healthy Climate Plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do primarily focus on those who are already engaged and interested in terms of like our mobilization efforts. I think that's where we see the most impact from the state level. So we don't think about that part as much of those who aren't as interested. But I do think just continuing to emphasize and build the case for why decarbonizing our economy is good for our economy and how it will create jobs and opportunity here in Michigan, as well as just creating communities that are healthier for us, that are more enjoyable to live in. I think those are just in the long term things that will help maybe sway some opinions.
And here's a question that asks, is there any movement in reducing emissions from CAFO, I believe? And did your presentation indicate emissions are increasing from these operations?
Yeah, so a CAFO, so it's a confined animal, sorry, I don't know the FO.
Feeding operation.
Feeding operation, thank you. I don't believe our emissions analysis gets into that level of granularity. And it's not something we're as focused on, but I know it is sometimes a concern. I think in general, this is an area where you might see biodigesters. Speaking a little, this is not my area of expertise, but it's not something we're necessarily currently engaged on.
And I guess one last question here, back to the funding issue. So has the plan made any, effort in case the federal funding does stop? Is there another source for funding for this program?
We like to say that we had the plan, it was released in 2022. So this was before you saw a big increase in climate funding. So it existed prior to a lot of those funding opportunities. So it'll exist after those opportunities fail to exist anymore either. So we're still committed to it. It's still the governor's goals. So we're still committed to doing the work with or without federal funding.
I could just, if I could add a question here. So the My Healthy Climate Plan was created through the governor's decision to create your office, or create the office. And I heard you say that some of the plan has been codified by the 2023 Clean Energy law,
Yes.
which is good. And is that a big piece of it? Are there small pieces? Are there other pieces that could go away if there was a new administration?
That's a great point, Sandra, and I should have brought it up myself. So thank you for mentioning it. Not only will the plan continue to exist without the federal funding, but because we did have that really awesome package of clean energy laws in 2023, it really is codified into law. So, I mean, obviously there's risk for repeal of any of it, such as I think what's being considered in the House. But generally, my understanding, it has really broad popularity. So there is in one of our, I should have added this to the slide deck, but in one of our annual reports, we talk about the ways in which parts of the plan made it into the clean energy legislation. So I'll try to find that and maybe put it up on the screen if I'm able to find it in time. If not, I can link to it in the chat.
Or you can just send it to me and we'll include it with the materials that we send out.
There, that works. Yeah.
I'm going to save the chat, and so we'll have the chat with all the links, and we'll also have Julia, if you could send that information to me on the interplay between the 2023 Clean Energy Act and the My Healthy Climate Plan, that would be great.
Yes, I can definitely do that.
So one less thing to worry about. So
there you go. All right.
Are we through with the questions,
I
Vicki?
think we have just one more here. And we talked a lot about federal funding. One question was here: how is the current Michigan Congress supporting or blocking the plan? Have they been supportive or what?
Another good question. We have at EGLE a legislative affairs program that more liaises with our representatives and senators, and so I actually, I'm so sorry, I can't speak to that. I think that we're not interacting regularly with our elected officials, so I don't know.
Okay.
You all asked very difficult questions. Thank you so much. It shows it's a very engaged group. So
yeah, well, we have a lot of things to think about here.
yes.
All right, so unless there's any more questions, I think we can all leave 10 minutes early. And thank you so much, Julia. This was great to have you speak. And Vicki, thank you for helping with the questions.
Sure.
And we're going to post the recording of this meeting on the LWVMI website, and we'll send a copy to everyone who registered. And if anybody's interested in joining the LWVMI Environmental Network, there's a way to contact me through our league website so you get to the LWVMI website and you click on our work and you go down to environmental, and there's a link to get in touch with me if you'd like to join. And our next meeting is going to be on June 19th at 11 a.m. via Zoom, and it's just going to be a meeting where we kind of go around the room and tell each other what we're doing to help preserve our planet. So if there's no more questions in the chat, then Then thank you again, everybody, for attending, and thank you, Julia, for such a great presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here. Mhm.
Bye-bye.